Let me read to you a passage from the 6th chapter of St. John's Gospel, verses 30 to 35. It's the Gospel for Tuesday of the 3rd week in Eastertide. St. John writes, "So they asked Jesus, 'What sign then will you give, that we may see it and believe you? What will you do? Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat.' Jesus said to them, 'I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven, but it is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world.' 'Sir,' they said, 'from now on, give us this bread.' Then Jesus declared, 'I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never thirst.'" That's from John chapter 6, verses 30 to 35. Speaking of the manna from God. What do I mean? Well, let me begin this way. You know, one of the most interesting of disciplines is archaeology. And for the past century and a half, archaeology has been flourishing. It has also polarized opinions in respect to the Old Testament history, with some saying that archaeology has demonstrated that such great events as the Exodus, the long sojourn in the wilderness, and the conquest of Palestine never happened. Where is the external evidence for Abraham, the patriarchs, including Joseph in Egypt, Moses, David, and any of the great prophets? Archaeology is largely silent. Well, others have mounted a vigorous support for the historicity of the great Old Testament events by making a surprising use of the little extrinsic evidence available. For instance, some have pointed to the parallels between the Old Testament account of the plagues in Egypt and the Ipuwer papyrus of Leiden, number 344. Many claim that that papyrus was written by an Egyptian named Ipuwer, and that it looks like an eyewitness account of the effects of the Exodus plagues from the perspective of an average Egyptian. Well, let us not enter into such matters here. I would only say that I find it inconceivable, humanly speaking, that the powerful tradition concerning the great historical events of the Old Testament was basically fantasy. The sheer weight of the Hebrew tradition and memory is powerful internal evidence for its professed history, whatever might be said of various details. There is a further consideration for the Christian. Jesus Christ himself refers to various persons and events of the Old Testament as if they actually happened. One such was the gift from God of manna in the desert to the children of Israel as they made their way in the wilderness. What would Christ have said if it had been claimed in conversation with him that there never was a Moses, nor an Exodus, nor the manna in the desert? Moses and Elijah actually appeared conversing with him at the Transfiguration. They appeared with him in glory. Of course, that is not to say that inspiration requires us to accept as historical, in the modern sense of the word, the full presentation of the past in the Old Testament texts in all its pictorial detail. It used to be thought that the doctrine of inspiration required of us that we take creation as having been effected over 6 days, because that is how creation is presented in Genesis 1. The advance of science and textual criticism has showed that this interpretation of the first page of Genesis is misconceived. Well, let us for a moment consider the feeding by God of his people with manna in the desert. We read that God kept his people going with plain food, manna and quail. In fact, very many people got tired of it, we read. It lacked variety. Back in Egypt, they had had melons and a variety of food from the well-irrigated soil of the land there. They wanted something tastier from God, and their grumbling risked a serious punishment. I myself think that such details as this provide even more internal evidence of the plausibility of the account. Well, be that as it may, the manna was a great sign of God's power on behalf of his people. It was always remembered as such. God could carry them through all their trials. It was bread from heaven. In our gospel today, the people, having already seen our Lord's miracle of the loaves and fishes, demand an even greater sign from heaven as proof of his claims. He had said that the one thing they must do was believe in him. This is the work of God, he had said, that you believe in the one he has sent. So they said, what sign can you do? A sign that we can see, that will induce us to believe in you. Our forefathers ate the manna in the desert. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat. Not only did this sign preserve the people's faith in God, but it kept alive their faith in Moses as God's appointed servant. What sign can you do? Our Lord then gives the true meaning of the manna in the desert. It itself was not the true bread that God would give from heaven. It always failed, and in any case it did not preserve from death. There is a truer bread from heaven, and it will give life to all, not just to the children of Israel. Jesus said to them, I tell you the truth. It is not Moses who has given you the bread from heaven. It is my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he who comes down from heaven and gives life to the world. A far more wondrous bread from God is coming, and he, Jesus, is that bread. Sir, they said, from now on give us this bread. Then Jesus declared, I am the bread of life. He who comes to me will never go hungry, and he who believes in me will never be thirsty. John chapter 6, verse 30 to 35. Let us learn to read the Gospels within the context of the entire Scriptures. The summit of the Scriptures is to be found in the Gospels because they present the person and teaching of Jesus Christ most directly. Our passage today is from a central chapter in the Gospel of St. John. It speaks of the Holy Eucharist, which is none other than the full human and divine reality of Jesus Christ. Let us look on him as our heavenly bread. He will give us life everlasting, both now and hereafter.